How can planners assure that pandemic is a constant in their hotel contracts under force majeure, and that hotels will exercise flexibility as some people are still hesitant to attend a face-to-face meeting? Lisa, do you want to kick this one off?
Absolutely, yes.
All right.
I've already said it once, but I'll say it again. If I'm representing the hotel, you are never going to get the word pandemic in your contract. You are never going to get disease. You're never going to get epidemic. You are never going to get health risk. You are never going to get any of those things, because from my perspective, it is not the health situation or pandemic that prevents you from having your meeting. It is the government restrictions on meeting size. It is quarantines. It is anything that the government imposes on you that prevents you from having your event. We are all living in a pandemic now. We have been for 2.5 years. And to a great extent, we go about our daily lives much as we did beforehand. So it's not the fact that there's a pandemic happening. A force majeure by its nature under the law is something unanticipated that impacts your performance. We can't say that the pandemic is unanticipated because we're in the thick of it. So we're having arguments all the time now, as I alluded to earlier, about whether or not the current situation with COVID allows parties to cancel their contracts without liability. From the hotel perspective, that answer is a resounding no, and Barbara may disagree with me, but it's not the pandemic. It is, can the event be held under the current restrictions? Can parties get there? Is there any reason that parties can't go forward? If parties are hesitant, that's not a force majeure. That's, they don't want to come. And generally under the law, if you don't want to, that means you owe cancellation damages. If you can't, it's a force majeure. If you don't want to, then you're back into the situation that we've been talking about all day of having a conversation about how you're going to deal with that, adjusting your room block, doing all those kinds of things. But this pandemic is not going away, and we're not going to agree that that's a force majeure going forward. Barbara, you probably disagree.
Well, I don't disagree with the fact, Lisa, as you said, that under the law, force majeure does require these unanticipated circumstances. But the law also allows the parties to negotiate clauses in their contract, essentially to negotiate their own definition of force majeure. Honestly, you don't even need to call it that. Again, call it Fred. It really doesn't matter. The point with it is, to Lisa's point as well, it's exercising the right to cancel without liability. What's the bar, right? And so I think the trend toward impacting the meeting in a particular way makes sense. Similarly, it can impact the hotel's ability to host the meeting in a particular way. So I think that's important. The unforeseen piece, to me, I mean, what is foreseen now? Obviously global warming, supply chain disruption, et cetera. It's just not a productive discussion. So again, my recommendation to groups, focus on what that benchmark is. Focus on, if you're going to focus on a percentage of people that aren't going to be able to come, focus on that. The why may not even be as important. You might not even need to fall on your sword over the why. You might be able to just negotiate on the what if we can't get this many people, and be able to document that. So really, it's important. The less you hear yourself say, and certainly myself as well say, this isn't the force majeure event. Just pause for a second, again, on groups and hotels, and say, what does the contract say it is? And again, that's really the focus, because think about this as a right of cancellation without liability, like construction, like strikes, like change in management, the other things that we negotiate. This is exactly it. And that's why I think I agree, labels, pandemic, et cetera, at the end of the day, think of what that bellwether is. Another important thing I think that you touched on, Lisa, in your response was the fact that it isn't just about the restrictions on travel and the rest. Oh, certainly could be. I've heard many clients say, and many of you might agree to this yourselves personally, and that is, it's the impact of what happens when I go, or if I go to the meeting, right? If I go to the meeting, when I come back, I'm going to have to get a test. Boy, tests are hard to find. When I go to the meeting, I'm going to come back. I'm not going to be able to go to my kid's school event because I had just traveled, et cetera. I'm going to be quarantined from work, whatever the impacts are. And we realize this is today. We don't know what tomorrow is. We don't know what next hour is. So all that said is really that benchmark, that mark, if you will, Lisa, again, going back to that second provision, where the bar is set in force majeure,